Good morning, you're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
And we're having a look at today's papers for you now. So the Mail leads with doctors being urged to call off their strikes after millions of public sector workers were offered a bumper pay rise.
The Mirror says, is there any way back for Hugh Edwards after the recent allegations?
In the Express, migrants will face increased fees when they enter Britain to fund public sector pay rises.
And the Metro says that Ellie has revealed he spent 6 weeks in rehab to kick an addiction to sleeping tablets.
Well, it's time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is broadcaster Liz Kershaw, alongside writer and journalist Andy Jones. Really good to see you both this morning. Andy, let's have a look at the Times, shall we? And this is Elon Musk and AI.
He's always up to something, isn't he, this Elon Musk? So Elon Musk has warned that we face a Terminator future. Terminator is in the Arnie film where robots were running the world, and he says he has set up a committee, a task force to try and fight this off. He says how close we are to superintelligence. I always feel close to superintelligence sitting by you guys, I have to say that.
That's true.
Apparently we're only 5 or 6 years away. Now, what do we mean by superintelligence? Superintelligence is the word given to where robots are significantly more intelligent than human beings. And obviously, if they're more intelligent than us, they can run the world, knock us out of stuff.
The second there is actual artificial intelligence, which we don't have now, within about 10 minutes they'll be more intelligent than us. I mean, that's the whole thing with AI, is it can learn 1,000,000 times faster than we can, so it will just learn and be better than we are.
Yes, I mean, the problem... I mean, we had a situation yesterday where a businessman in India laid off hundreds of his staff because he said AI can do the job cheaper and faster than they can. Well, and we talked about the future of young people in schools, how much they're going to be set back by COVID, etc. But you could have a lot of young people who are paying tens of thousands of pounds to get degrees, and their skills are immediately redundant by the very second that they leave university. And I think we have to be in a position where we say, well, actually, we need to protect jobs, we need to protect interests, but at the same time, as Rishi Sunak has made the point, well, it's not good us protecting interests and stopping AI if China or other countries are going to go, let's have as much AI as possible, let's pump however much money into it. Yeah. Changing world.
Well, at the moment, AI's quite rubbish, isn't it, in some circumstances? I've been dealing with chatbots for 4 weeks now. Oh. Because I ordered a wedding present for our Linda. You know, our Linda, yeah. She married a toy boy. And very nice, these two. Anyway, this wedding present didn't get delivered, and I've been trying and trying. I can't speak to a human being. No. At the delivery company or the firm I bought it off, they've had me money, can't get anywhere. And when you ask them a question, the robot isn't quite up to speed yet and can't understand what you're asking, and then they come back and then they shut you. When they can't deal with you, they have no manners. They just shut you down and cut you off. Yeah. So I'd like to see a bit more
and the other thing about
intelligence of any kind.
And the other thing about AI is they only train it on classic English cut glass accents. So if you've got a Birmingham accent or a Northern accent, or Birmingham accent like mine, or you speak quickly, it doesn't understand what you're saying anyway. I've
said it before, I can't park in Westminster because the meters, when you try and say your registration on Ringo, it doesn't understand the flat vowel. No. So I have to put on a posh voice. I have to stand on the pavement instead of going, A-E-I-O-U 23. I'm sorry. And then you go, A-E-I-O-U 23. Your parking session has started.
See, the robots are already shutting us out. Shut us out of the Prime Minister's phone and stopping Liz's parking.
There you go, you see, it's calamitous. Liz, let's have a look at the Express, should we, and the BBC.
Yeah, well, it's all over the papers again today, and various different angles. There's an interview with the parents of the young person who was in contact with Hugh Edwards, and those parents first brought it to the attention of the BBC and the police, and in the end, the Sun newspaper. And then the stories about Victoria, Derbyshire, which David was talking about earlier, David Mellor. The people in the newsroom, Hugh Edwards' colleagues, were already working on a story about him before this broke with the Sun. So this really begs the question, which I think is on a lot of people's minds, is how could this happen that people went to the BBC with such shocking claims and the BBC did nothing for 7 weeks? So my answer to that would, I've spent 35 years there with many different Director Generals and many different scandals and crises and cover-ups. And one thing people could do is spend time watching the 2 series of W1A, because it's comedy, but it's not fiction. And even when this blew up last week, somebody in the BBC described the scene where there are all these managers. Oh, that's very strong. In a glass room, maybe the Frankie Howard. I remember I went in for a meeting and they said, oh, we booked the Frankie Howard. We tried to book the Frankie Howard, but it's already booked, so we're in the Jill Dando. You know, and they think, what? Anyway, so they're all sat in there. They were all moaning because they wanted to be at home. They were all having expensive meals and ice creams brought in. Basically, if you remember in W1A, nobody spoke to the boss at the time, the Director General, Tony Hall. There was this running gag where one of them would say, well, Tony feels, or when I saw Tony this morning. And there's still that deference, and there's still that hierarchy, and there's still this autocrat at the top. And people are deferential. But there's a management structure which I've observed since the 80s. There's too many layers, there's too many of them, it's a waste of money. None of them make programmes, but they seem to exist to look after each other, watch each other's backs, self-promote, self-protect, and that takes up all the time with meetings, etc. But the main thing, the aim, is to suppress stuff. So if something's a bit awkward, you don't want those at the top to know about it. You keep it down. I have a lot of time for Tim Davie, of the half a dozen Director Generals that I've dealt with, and he would, I honestly believe, he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He can be very abrasive, which may be why some people are put off approaching him. But I honestly believe that he would not have had a clue about this until the press office was contacted by the Sun, and he would have gone mad. Meanwhile, somebody who did get hold of this when the parents first complained, and, by the way, was so upset with being fobbed off on the phone that the stepfather actually presented himself at BBC reception. Well, you're wasting your time, because nowadays they're all outsourced and they don't know anybody. They don't know what goes on behind the door. But they actually presented themselves and were turned away, and then they'd been to the police. Then, in desperation, they went to the Sun. But somebody will have got this in their in tray. I know, I've seen it. Faffed about, sent one email, no response, made a call to a mobile which wasn't answered, and then put it to one side and hoped it would go away. And that's what happens. There's sand shifting, there's buck passing. But there's a quote that I found, you know, the Martin Bashir stuff with how he secured the Diana interview. And it's now all been exposed that the management of the news division were complicit in that. They knew, a lot of them knew what I was doing. In fact, Tony Hall, who'd already left the BBC as Director General, had to resign as director, was he, of the National Gallery or some arty thing, because it was proved that he'd known about this. And the Telegraph ran an article a couple of weeks ago that the BBC said at the time that 2 years ago, that they couldn't talk to Martin Bashir about it when Earl Spencer and Prince William come out, because he was too poorly. But the Telegraph, through Freedom of Information, have uncovered a whole chain of emails to show that management, back and forth, were talking to Martin Bashir. So another lie. So when that, so in 2021, the man who's now saying we'll sort this, Tim Davie, said, the BBC should have been more transparent about what it knew, more honest. We've learnt lessons. We've got better procedures in place. That's 2 full years. That was June 2021. That's 2 full years. And here we are. Nothing's changed.
Yeah, it's annoyed me that senior figures at the BBC, senior journalists at the BBC, have started attacking the family involved in this case. But they did the compassionate, decent thing, which was they went straight to the BBC. They said, our son, who is vulnerable, is being paid huge sums of money by a key presenter.
Well, they went to Andy, but they did go to the police first and were turned away. So in desperation, I think they went to the BBC.
They went to the BBC, they went to the police, and then they went to the Sun, and they didn't get paid by the Sun. And there's this sort of nudge, wink, wink, that this is a sort of paid-for kiss and tell, and that's absolutely not the case. I think that's really what the public interest is here. It's not necessarily that BBC Newsreader has been up to this, which is also I think, a public right to know story. The second piece is if you have a legitimate complaint when you go to the BBC of something this serious about a key figure at the BBC, you don't get further than reception, and I think that's what's really disappointing.
Okay, let's move on from this one now before we get into two more hot water on this one. Andy, let's have a look at the Sun, should we? Interesting line if you're over 80.
Yes,
Things are on the up.
we've already had a bit of pensioner misbehaviour on the show a moment ago, so we're now talking about the rise in old chaps on Viagra.
Well, good on them.
Last year it was, a few years ago it was over 60s using Viagra, then a couple of years ago it was over 70s. Guess what we've got now? We've now got over 80s being given Viagra, including blokes 100 plus who are still up for it. We're living longer.
Good for them.
What better way to cure depression, I say. But they gave, there were almost 200,000 prescriptions for Viagra-style medication issued to men in their 80s. Stop for a gift for Father's Day, you know what to get, I think, these days. Yeah, you was to say.
I think it's such a widespread problem. The problem I'm not going to mention, you know, but I've read a lot about it recently. You know, there's all this stuff last year about the menopause and female celebrities coming out, and we need more medication and stuff. There's a lot of help for women when the hormones go into meltdown in middle age. And there are gynecologists, but there are no andrologists in the NHS. There's no doctors to specifically look at testosterone levels and performance levels, if I may put it like that. And I think that's wrong.
Yes, probably.
You'll need it one day, Stephen.
Can we move on? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, both
Liz and Andy.
A range of stories there. Thank you very much. Now, you OK? Yeah.